Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little strange, a little soothing and definitely green. We're heading into the flickering candlelight of a Victorian kitchen, where someone's gently ladling warm lettuce water into a porcelain teacup. Yep, lettuce in a cup. The smell isn't exactly appetizing, kind of like boiled garden hose. But to someone in 19th century England, this might be the final comfort before bed. A last, quiet ritual. Not a cup of cocoa, not a whiskey nightcap, but a broth made from limp, leafed vegetables. You sure you'd survive that kind of bedtime? Because I know I'd be sneaking cookies under the floorboards. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it over there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lean against the worn wood counter, watching the kettle hiss and steam. Someone drops a few pale green leaves into a pot, adds a sprinkle of something vaguely medicinal, and begins to stir. It's quiet, except for the sound of simmering and the tick of a clock in the next room. You're not in your own time anymore. This is a household that believes boiled lettuce might chase away your demons. Victorian England didn't exactly invent weird bedtime habits, but it definitely gave them flair. By the mid-1800s, nighttime was becoming a carefully managed space, filled with whispered rules and rituals. It wasn't just about getting rested, it was about virtue, digestion, morality, and somehow, lettuce people of the time believed certain foods could either protect or betray you during sleep. There were whole pamphlets warning about late-night indulgences, leading to visceral nightmares or corrupted bile. Lettuce, on the other hand, was seen as a quiet hero, mild, moistening, cooling to the blood. A leafy lullaby. And it wasn't just an old wives' tale. Well, okay, it kind of was, but it had cultural weight. Medical texts of the era often recommended lettuce broth as a gentle sedative. It was thought to calm the humors and encourage peaceful sleep. Some swore by it. Others, presumably, just swallowed it and tried not to think too hard. What did this lettuce water taste like? Think weak. Tea, if the tea leaves were replaced with something you forgot in your fridge's crisper drawer. But it wasn't about taste. It was about belief and the feeling that you were doing something to make the night a little less uncertain. The Victorians were obsessed with control, especially over the body. A well-regulated digestive system, a well-ventilated bedroom, a morally upright bedtime routine, these were marks of refinement. And so, while the poor might gnaw on dry crusts to sleep through hunger, the wealthier classes sipped on leaves steeped in a sense of self-superiority. There's something faintly comical about it, isn't there? Imagine someone in a lace nightcap, solemnly sipping their mug of boiled salad, while lecturing their children about sin and overexcitement. Drink your lettuce, darling, it will quiet your passions. But underneath the silliness, there's something tender too. People were trying to manage their nerves, trying to find peace in a world that was getting noisier and faster with every new invention. The railway thundered across the countryside. Factories hummed through the night. Letters arrived faster than ever, bearing news too quick for the soul to process. Sleep became harder to come by. So maybe lettuce water was a kind of protest. A pause. A gentle no thank you to overstimulation. It also helped that lettuce was easy to grow. Even modest households could have a few heads in the garden. In an era before over-the-counter sleep aids or white noise machines, this was affordable calm. And perhaps, in a way, more intimate. Someone had to pick the leaves, rinse them, heat the water. It was care, in the form of a broth. Some historians suggest this was more than a health fad, it was a quiet rebellion. Women, especially, used such rituals to carve out private time at the end of overburdened days. A moment for themselves. A small vegetal exhale. Others, of course, argue the whole thing was nonsense. Lactocarium, the so-called sleeping compound in lettuce, is present in such trace amounts that you'd have to drink gallons of broth to feel even a flicker of drowsiness, which, ironically, would just make you need the chamber pot. Still, the image persists. A quiet home, a flicker of firelight, a pair of hands cupping warm porcelain. The taste might not be memorable, but the moment is. And you're still in this Victorian kitchen, watching the steam rise amid feel something soften in you, too. Not because lettuce is magic, but because bedtime, in any century, is about more than sleep. It's about setting something down, loosening your grip on the day. So go on, Take a sip, or at least imagine you do. It probably tastes terrible, but it means you're cared for. In the odd, leafy language of the past, you set the cup down and feel your breath match the slow tick of the clock again. Night has always asked us to believe strange things. That dreams mean something. That monsters live under beds. That boiled lettuce can hush the heart. And maybe, for tonight, that's enough. The fire's glow has faded to a low, steady ember. You shift slightly, the wooden floor cool beneath your feet. Somewhere in the next room, a mouse rustles behind a wall panel, but no one stirs. You're still in this quiet Victorian home. And now the topic turns because not every late-night ritual involved lettuce. In fact, most DID and single quotes Welcome to the awkward experimental world of Victorian caffeine avoidance. Because yes, tea might be king, but after sunset, even tea was treated with suspicion. The Victorians had an ongoing love-hate relationship with stimulation. By day, caffeine was a fashionable necessity. But at night, oh no, that tiny cup of tea suddenly transformed into a threat to virtue, digestion, and dreams. You'd think people were mainlining espresso with the way they reacted, and so began a curious trend. Finding gentle substitutes for anything that might keep the body alert, when it was supposed to be retiring. You hear that word a lot in Victorian texts. People didn't go to bed, they retired, like a lamp being respectfully turned off. Without caffeine, the question became, what do you drink? The answer, everything else. From barley water to warm beer, toasted bread and hot milk, or even something called slippery elm tea, which sounds like a Hogwarts potion but was very real and deeply mucousy. Yes, mucousy. People drank that, on purpose. For health. One of the most popular substitutions was post-tim, a kind of roasted grain beverage that promised the comfort of coffee without the chaos. It tasted like someone brewed regret, but it was marketed heavily to parents, clergy, and women who wanted to sleep with a clear conscience and an untroubled liver. You turn a page in an old kitchen manual. There's a hand-drawn diagram of something called fig coffee, literally roasted figs ground into powder. The instructions are handwritten in slanted, careful script. May promote gentle rest and discourage dreams of immorality. You raise an eyebrow. That's a bold claim for a fruit paste pretending to be coffee. But these drinks weren't just about biology. They were about morality. A good night's sleep was part of a good person's life. Anything that delayed it or worse, interfered with, it became suspect. Coffee could excite the nerves. Tea could unsettle the womb. Even hot chocolate, once considered medicinal, had fallen under suspicion. So the search continued. People boiled apple peels in water. They poured warm oat milk over chamomile blossoms. Some added cloves and cinnamon, not for flavor, but for their temperamental balancing effects, which sounds like a polite way to say calms your inner drama queen. One forgotten fad involved drinking lukewarm vinegar mixed with honey and rosewater to quiet the stomach and the soul, as one cookbook poetically described. Honestly, that sounds more like a punishment for lying. And of course, there were those who clung to more traditional remedies, warm ale, milk stout, or even a dash of sherry in a pan of warm cream. Alcohol was controversial in the Victorian bedtime. Canon, depending on who you asked, it either invited Satan or sedated him. Even water was debated. Cold water before bed was thought to shock the digestion and provoke night disturbances. You imagine someone in a frilly robe scolding their spouse. George, how dare you sip cold water at this hour? You'll summon indigestion. It's almost funny how much effort people put into falling asleep. And yet, it's not so different from today. We scroll for hours for the perfect herbal blend, ASMR video, or night lamp hue. We convinced ourselves that sleep is something we can engineer, if only we find the right tool, the right cup, the right ritual. In that way, you're just like them, sitting in the dark, searching for quiet. They had barley drinks. You have blue light filters. Same impulse, different flavor. Somewhere in a little Victorian village, there's a woman folding her apron, whispering goodnight to her cat, and setting her fig coffee beside the bed. She doesn't expect it to taste good. She expects it to mean something, that she's done what she could, that the rest is out of her hands. And maybe that's the real trick. Sleep, then and now, isn't something we fall into. It's something we offer ourselves. Like a peace treaty, after a long day, you prepare it, pour it gently, and hope it takes darts or whatever you've got in your cup, fig, coffee, barley water, or something slightly less Victorian. I hope it's warm. I hope it helps start you reach for the kettle again. Surprised at how comforting the sound has become. No caffeine, no sugar rush, Just warmth. Just steam. Just you. Tomorrow's noise can wait. The house creaks, like it's exhaling. You settle deeper into the wooden chair, its cushion long since flattened by time. The fire gives off just enough light to cast shadows that move like memory. And in this pocket of stillness, we arrive at something stranger still. The bedtime snacks that were never meant to be snacks, but might have caused more dreams than any of them intended. You're flipping through the frayed pages of a household guidebook. And there it is, in a neat list of foods to avoid after 8 o'clock. Trifle, custard, cheese, eggs, and, inexplicably, turnips, all of them, apparently, guilty of awakening phantasmagoric disturbances of the mind. In other words, nightmares. Welcome to the unofficial menu of Victorian sleep sabotage. It wasn't just what you ate, it was when and why. Many Victorians believed that rich or overly moist foods before bed could cause an overexcited stomach, which in turn led to overly vivid dreams. Sometimes so vivid, you might actually get up and act them out. That's right, mid's omelette equals accidental break-in at the neighbors. There is even a semi-famous case from 1879 of a London gentleman who sleepwalked into Hyde Park, wearing only his nightshirt and a monocle after allegedly consuming a late-night dish of cold, poached eggs with mustard. The newspapers dubbed him the Egg Phantom. That name did not help his social life. You stifle a laugh. But the worry was real. In Victorian thinking, the gut and the brain were directly linked, connected by a series of mysterious vapors, or what they sometimes called gastric winds. It sounds ridiculous now, like a haunted digestion. But back then, science-adjacent. If you dreamed of flying, they blamed soft cheeses. If you woke up shouting, they blamed salted beef. And if you dreamt of inappropriate things, especially things involving ankles, they blamed a warm egg yolk and an untamed imagination. Some guides even went as far as prescribing dream-safe menus. You read one aloud, your voice echoing slightly in the quiet. 2 rusks, no butter, 1 half-boiled carrot week, chamomile infusion, and silence. Imagine telling someone that today. Sorry, can't have popcorn during the movie. It disturbed my gastric winds, and I'll dream of scandal. Victorian midnight life was wild, just extremely politely wild, but not all of it was nonsense. Some foods do interact with your nervous system. Historians now think that certain combinations like sugar and protein, or dairy and spice may indeed affect sleep quality or dream recall. Even lettuce broth has trace compounds that can mimic sedatives. It just takes more than a cup, like a lot more. And of course, people back then didn't have the benefit of blackout curtains, soundproof walls, or smartphones to doom scroll. Their dreams were often their only theater, their only rebellion, their only escape. No wonder they tried to control them. Some even used food as a form of dream manipulation. A curious trend emerged in the 1860s, predictive sleep eating. People would consume certain ingredients in hopes of dreaming the future. One popular recipe involved chopped onions, vinegar, and a spoon of molasses, taken just before bed. For prophetic clarity, it said. You wrinkle your nose. That sounds more like a dare than a dietary tip. But hey, the Victorians were nothing if not committed to the bit. Still, there was a softer side to all of this. Parents would carefully prepare bland little suppers for their children. Milk with cinnamon, bread lightly toasted, perhaps a soft-boiled potato, just enough to keep bad dreams from noticing. One mother wrote in her diary, even adults took comfort in routine. A man might have the same 3-biscuit plate every night for 20 years, not because it was tasty, but because it made sleep feel safer. Like nothing could go wrong if the menu never changed. But the anxiety remained. As the century wore on, and industrial life grew more hectic, so did the fear of what might be unleashed by the wrong morsel at the wrong hour. And so, no trifle, no eggs, definitely no turnips. You imagine someone whispering that warning before bed, as if the vegetables might hear you and get ideas. The fire's mostly ash now. Outside, you hear a horse-drawn cart rattle over cobblestones, and then silence again. You sit with the strange beauty of it, all the desperation to tame the night, even through something as ordinary as food. Because sleep isn't just a physical act, it's psychological, it's sacred, and sometimes, it's just weird. Especially if there's mustard involved. You smile. You don't need to believe it all to feel the echo. The care behind the customs. The humor behind the horror. And the faint, rustling truth that people have always tried to eat their way into peace. The embers have gone dull, but the warmth lingers, so does the scent of something faintly sweet. You shift your weight and hear the soft creak of the old floorboards again. And just like that, we drift into another room, another layer of the night. This one smells faintly of nutmeg, burnt sugar, and boiled mutton. Yes, this is the realm of the rich. And in the world of Victorian midnight eating, the upper class had their own strange ways of keeping sleep close, ways that involved everything from branded milk to elaborate puddings that required footmen to serve. Because nothing says bedtime like 3 courses and a moral lecture. Let's be clear, for the wealthy Victorians, eating before bed wasn't always about rest. Sometimes, it was about display. A demonstration that you had the leisure to eat when others couldn't. That you could afford a cook, a scullery maid, and the imported spices to make your digestive tract fancy at 11p.m. In one aristocratic home, you find a handwritten menu for an evening repast after the theatre. Aspic of quail, sherry, syllabub, mutton, toast fingers, pears in Madeira, and a small cup of warm beef tea to restore equilibrium. I mean, that's not a snack. That's a mini festival. And it wasn't even considered indulgent. It was cultured, refined, digestively dignified. You imagine the scene. Candlelit drawing rooms, satin nightrobes, silver spoons tapping lightly against porcelain. A servant uncocks the port while someone recites Tennyson from memory. Someone else yawns modestly, then tucks into a chilled custard with a hint of saffron and superiority. Meanwhile, downstairs, the kitchen staff prepares the remains tray, what's left over from the meal, trimmed and repurposed. Cold ham for the butler, day-old bread crusts for the maid, maybe even a slice of syllabub, if the lady of the house didn't finish hers. But not everything served at these late-night tables was lavish. Some dishes, like barley gruel or plain rice pudding, were holdovers from older traditions, meals designed to settle the nerves or blanket the thoughts. The idea was to ease the body into docility without stimulating the brain. Sometimes, however, it backfired. There's a delightful diary entry from a viscountess in 1882, complaining that the cardamom rice gave her visions of her second husband's terrible piano playing and caused her to wake up in a fury. No record of what the rice thought about that still. There were rules of in for decadence. The upper class avoided spicy foods at night, fearing they might stir undesirable passions. They also avoided shellfish, not because of allergies, but because oysters were considered too vigorous for a sleeping body. Go figure. On the flip side, they loved warm, thick drinks. Possets made from curdled milk, ale, and spices were a common favorite. If that sounds medieval to you, good ear. It was a medieval recipe, and the Victorians, in their nostalgia-obsessed way, brought it back with enthusiasm. The result? Something between a soup, a foam, and a regret. You flip through another ledger, this one tracking household expenses. There's a line item for sleep syrup, which turns out to be a mix of lavender, tincture, honey, and a whisper of laudanum. Yes, that laudanum, the opiate, prescribed and served in dainty little spoons. Suddenly, the quiet nights make a lot more sense. Of course, these sedative treats weren't advertised as narcotics. They were digestive relaxants, or evening elixirs. You know, branding. But make no mistake, the boundary between medicine and desert blurred fast, once your fortune allowed for it. There's something almost theatrical about it all. The table was set, the tone was hushed. The food was curated not just for taste, but for effect. A nightcap could be comforting or controlling. A soft spoonful of milk jelly might lull you, or it might nudge your mind into forgetting whatever you weren't supposed to remember. Some historians even suggest that for certain aristocrats, elaborate bedtime snacks were a way to avoid intimacy. A way to say, oh dear, I'm far too full for anything else. Let's retire separately. Lettuce as an excuse. Custard as a cold shoulder. But not always. Sometimes, a shared spoonful of something warm and slow melting was the closest to people came to peace all day. You hear footsteps upstairs. Someone else in this old house, maybe finishing their own night ritual. You stay where you are, in the velvet hush of the past, wondering how much of their hunger was about food and how much was about being seen. Even just for a moment, before the lights went out. The air feels heavier now, like it's soaked up too many memories. You rub your fingers against the edge of a faded tablecloth and realize it's dotted with tiny, leafy stains. Lettuce, maybe, or parsley, or some forgotten green that once promised dreams. Tonight, it's time to finally face the hero of this strange ritual, the humble, floppy, slightly tragic Victorian lettuce. You wouldn't think much of it at first glance. It wilts when you look at it wrong. It turns bitter if the day's too hot. It's the kind of thing you push around your plate and hope no one notices. But to the Victorians, lettuce was medicine, sleep medicine, soul medicine, and possibly a way to sneak in a little piece at the end of a rigid, overpolished day. The belief didn't start in the 1800s. It's older, ancient even. Greek and Roman texts praised lettuce for its cooling nature. Pliny the Elder wrote about it. So did Galen. But the Victorians, well, they made it their own. They boiled it. They steeped it. They turned it into broth, tincture, pudding, even lotion. If it could be lettuce, it was dotted the center of this lettuce obsession with something called lacticarium, a white, milky substance found in some lettuce stems, especially when the leaves are damaged. It was sometimes called lettuce opium, not because it was addictive or especially strong, but because it was thought to have a mild sedative effect. Now, let's not get carried away. The amount of actual lacticarium in a bowl of boiled lettuce water is tiny. You'd get more effect rubbing your eyes and pretending to be tired. But facts never stood in the way of a good bedtime ritual. You flip through a battered old herbal compendium and find a recipe. Boil 2 heads of lettuce with a pinch of nutmeg and 5 drops of orange flower water. Take in small sips while seated near the hearth. Do not speak for 1 hour afterward. A little dramatic, but also weirdly sweet. It wasn't just about the liquid. It was about the stillness it invited. The quiet after the spoon. The idea that, for 1 hour, you were allowed, expected, even to say nothing. To simply exist. Some added hoppy flowers to the mix. Others stirred in mint or fennel to improve the taste. One very ambitious Victorian woman supposedly made a whole lettuce cordial, aged in glass bottles and labeled by moon-phased. Honestly, respect. But it wasn't just the sleep-inducing myth that kept lettuce in the teacup. It was the symbolism. Lettuce was humble, earthy. It grew easily in small gardens and kitchen plots. Unlike expensive spices or imported teas, it was democratic, almost subversive. A way for poor households to claim their own version of peace. There's a story from a Lancashire mother, circa 1870, who grew rows of lettuce in clay pots on the windowsill. She couldn't afford doctors or sleeping powders for her children, so she'd make them lettuce broth on cold nights, wrap them in threadbare blankets, and tell them, the leaves whisper when they boil, and if you listen hard, they'll take your bad dreams. Of course, some modern historians would scoff at that. Placebo, they'd say folk nonsense. But what is a placebo, really, if not hope with a recipe? You smile at the thought. Maybe the lettuce never had any special power. Maybe it was just a quiet signal that someone cared enough to boil something for you, to bring you a cup, warm and slightly bitter, and wait while you drank. And not everyone bought into it. There were skeptics, even then. A dry-witted columnist in Punch magazine once wrote, "I tried the lettuce cure. Alas, I only dreamed of salads, and awoke with a craving for vinegar." Still, the practice held on in dusty cottages and elegant parlors alike. Some sipped it straight, others poured it over crusts of bread. One recipe even called for sweetening it with a lump of sugar and a whisper of vanilla. Yes, lettuce, dessert. The Victorian era was bold. As you sit here now, surrounded by shadows and imagined teacups, you wonder, what will future generations say about our rituals? The sleep apps, the weighted blankets, the 10-step wind-down routines. Will they chuckle? Or will they understand perfectly that sleep is never just about sleep? You stand, stretch, and imagine the soft clink of a spoon in ceramic. Maybe lettuce isn't your thing. Maybe it never was. But the idea that bedtime can be gentle, intentional, and oddly green has a certain charm. So you tip your head toward the ghosts of all those midnight leaf boilers and think, thanks for trying. Sleep's a strange country. And sometimes, it takes a vegetable passport to get there. The fire has gone out completely now. Only the faint smell of scorched wood and the ghost of warmth cling to the air. You find yourself standing near the mantel, staring into the shadows, and realizing, we haven't talked about milk yet. Yes, milk, the old bedtime standby. Beloved by grandmothers, scorned by lactose-intolerant rebels, and, in Victorian times, practically sanctified. But it wasn't just the milk, it was what they did with it. Because in this era, a glass of warm milk wasn't just comfort food, it was practically a sermon in liquid form. Victorians thought of warm milk the way we think of melatonin gummies, a low-tech miracle, a gentle whisper to the nerves. And if you add a few drops of rosewater or orange blossom extract, now it's not just sleep, it's character building. You can almost hear the creaky voice of a governess. Drink it slow. My dear, It calms the spirit and wards off unclean thoughts. Unclean thoughts, in this case, might be anything from late-night card games to reading a French novel. After 9 p.m. you open a slim, gold-embossed cookbook titled Dainty Comforts for Ladies in the Evening, and there it is. A whole chapter called The Ethics of Milk. That's right, ethics. The Victorians had strong opinions about milk and morals. Some thought cold milk was vulgar. Others warned that warm milk must never be sweetened too much, lest it excite the senses. You can't help but chuckle. The drink that today's toddlers throw on the floor in protest was once viewed as a sacred vessel of virtue. And to some extent, they weren't wrong. Milk does contain tryptophan, a compound associated with drowsiness. But again, like with lettuce, you'd need to drink quite a bit to truly feel it. Still, the placebo effect wore a boatie and carried a silver tray. But even more fascinating was what milk meant symbolically. To the Victorians, milk was a kind of return, a reconnection with infancy, purity, softness. It was maternal comfort without the messy business of emotions. One sip, and you were back in a world where someone else took care of you. It wasn't just for the children. Full-grown men drank milk nightcaps in front of the fire, sometimes laced with cardamom or nutmeg. Women wrote in their diaries about the comfort of a warm mug cradled between their palms. The house quiet at last, the children asleep, the dishes done, a moment where they belonged to no one. You flip to a page marked with a red ribbon and find a recipe simply titled Night Milk for Melancholy. Take milk not from the evening but the morning. Warm it gently until it trembles but does not boil. Add sugar made from beets and a petal of dried rose. Drink alone. Do not answer the door. You pause on that last line. Do not answer the door. Somehow, it feels less like a culinary tip and more like a spell. Of course, not everyone found milk comforting. Some thought it clogged the humors. Others accused it of congesting the imagination. One satirical writer claimed it made him dream of being smothered by polite cows. Still, milk stuck around. It was cheap, available, and easy to dress up or down. It took on the mood of the night. You could lace it with cinnamon and feel cozy. You could float bits of stale sponge cake in it and feel tragic. Or you could chill it with cracked ice and feel like someone very cosmopolitan, though your digestive system would beg to differ. In some households, milk wasn't just a drink, it was a ceremony. You'd light a single candle, set a tray, fold a cloth napkin just so, perhaps even say a short prayer. Not because milk required all this, but because you did. And sometimes, milk became a boundary, a signal to yourself that the day was done, that the arguments, the laundry, the taxes, the awkward conversation with your neighbor about goose ownership could all wait. The cup said, "Not now. This is sleep time." You breathe in deeply, imagining the soft steam of milk rising in a quiet kitchen. Somewhere in the past, a mother hums to herself while stirring a pan. Somewhere else, a tired clerk lights a lamp and sets a chipped mug beside his journal, and in both cases, the world calms. Just a little. Maybe you'll never crave warm milk. Maybe you find it too bland, too symbolic, too lactose. But there's something gentle about the act of preparing it. The slowness, the hush, the intent. Because it's never really about the milk. It's about marking the shift from doing to being, from noise to stillness, from surviving to resting. And in that quiet, white cup, whether you drink it or not, you sense a kind of grace. The wind outside has picked up, brushing against the windows like fingertips tracing memory. You tuck your blanket tighter around your shoulders. As the fire's warmth gives way to something even softer, the rituals of sleep that weren't meant for comfort, but for control. You see, to the Victorian mind, sleep wasn't a passive state. It was a discipline, a moral performance, a test of self-control and, yes, of posture. That's right, you couldn't just flop into bed and call it a night. You had to earn your sleep, preferably by lying perfectly still, facing the right direction, breathing properly, and, if possible, suppressing all unwholesome thoughts. You think modern bedtime routines are exhausting? Try memorizing a 12-point checklist for upright Christian repose. Step 1. Do not eat after 9. Step 2. Do not sleep on your left side. Step 3. Do not allow your feet to face a door. It invites death. Step 4. Think of heaven, not food, not romance. Certainly not ankles. In one medical journal from 1843, you find the following recommendation. Retire to bed in a state of humility and cleanliness. Lie upon the right side, hands gently folded over the abdomen, and recite a psalm. Do not move until sleep takes you. lest the soul become agitated. Agitated soul equals poor digestion equals moral decay. The math checks out. For a certain kind of Victorian. This philosophy wasn't just about superstition, was part of a broader obsession with self-regulation. In a world exploding with industrial noise, social change, and questionable plumbing, sleep became a place where one could reassert control over the body, over the mind, over the mess of it all. And what better place to begin than the bedroom? Victorian bedrooms weren't always cozy. For many, especially in middle-class homes, they were sparse, orderly, and faintly judgmental. The wallpaper was neutral, the furniture austere, the mattress firm to the point of theological. Heaven forbid you fall asleep on a featherbed and enjoy yourself. You laugh under your breath, imagining someone apologizing to their mattress for being too soft. I'm sorry, I'll make up for it with stricter lumbar alignment tomorrow. Books, like The Proper Habits of Sleep, a real title. By the way, warned against excessive dreaming, claiming that nocturnal imagination, untethered by discipline, may give rise to dangerous longing. Dangerous longing, in this context, probably meant imagining you were in Italy, eating cheese past 10 p.m. But the most fascinating thing, many people didn't sleep through the night. Segmented sleep, 2 blocks of slumber separated by a quiet wakeful hour, was common, and for some, expected. That in-between time, often called the watch, was when people would pray, read scripture, write letters, or sip, you guessed it, lettuce broth. Not a bad marketing opportunity, honestly. Lettuce broth, for all your 3 a.m. existential needs. This hour wasn't treated as insomnia. It was sacred time, a chance to reflect, to repent, to review the day's moral failures, and possibly knit a sock while you're at it. You were supposed to wake and gently return to bed, ideally with less sin on your conscience. Even children were trained in this rhythm. In boarding schools, teachers would sometimes wake students during the night for virtue checks, which, frankly, sounds like a plotline from a very sad Dickensian horror film. Not all of this was fear-based, though. There were some genuinely lovely ideas embedded in the ritual. That sleep could be a form of prayer. That stillness was an offering. That dreams, though suspicious, might carry messages not from the subconscious, but from something more, eternal, still. It wasn't all candles and contemplation. There were also books warning against demons entering your dreams if your windows faced west, or that sleeping with your mouth open would cause your soul to escape and be replaced by a small toad. A toad. You stare at that sentence in disbelief. But there it is. Page 97. On the hidden vulnerabilities of slumber. You wonder how many children clamped their mouths shut every night in terror of amphibian possession. Eventually, modern medicine came along and swept much of this away. We began to study REM cycles. We invented better pillows. We learned that your soul probably isn't escaping through your mouth. Unless you snore. Then all bets are off. But a part of you misses the solemnity. The idea that sleep was sacred. Not just recovery, but ritual. A soft ceremony performed night after night. With folded hands and held breath. You lie back now, no longer rigid. No longer judged, feeling how the body sinks when it's finally given permission to rest. You don't face north. You don't recite a psalm. You don't fold your hands unless they want folding. But still, you fall into something. Not obedience, not virtue. Just ... quiet. And maybe, in its own way, that's holy too. The hush has deepened. Not just quiet, but a layered stillness. Like the house is wrapped in thick wool. You feel it in your chest, like the slow descent of fog. And now, we arrive at the strangest doorway of all. The fine Victorian line between sleep aid and soft poison. Because not every bedtime ritual was harmless. Some were tinged with desperation, others with mystery, and some with just enough opium to make you forget where your bed ended and your dreams began. You've probably heard of laudanum. It was everywhere in Victorian England, from middle parlors to aristocratic medicine cabinets. A liquid blend of alcohol and powdered opium. It was sold over the counter in dainty glass bottles, decorated labels, gold lettering, for nervous disturbances, for women's rest, for gentle slumber. If that feels alarming, this was a time when you could buy morphine at the chemist's, next to your licorice lozenges, and many did, because sleep wasn't guaranteed. It had to be coaxed, bribed, or chemically wrestled into being. You find a small notebook, pages yellowed, with one particularly haunting recipe, for nights of great agitation. 1 teaspoon laudanum, in warm milk, a touch of nutmeg, and a prayer to Saint Dimf. That last part feels more like insurance than faith. What's more, women were disproportionately encouraged to take such things. Sleeplessness in women was pathologized, linked to hysteria, imagination, improper blood flow, or even reading too much poetry. Yes, reading. Imagine being told your book habit is to blame for your nightmares. Sorry, Brontë sisters. You were just too vivid. Physicians, almost all men, prescribed tonics freely, not just laudanum, but chloral hydrate, ether-based drops, and sleeping draughts that would knock out a cow. All sold under the banner of modesty, health, and womanly delicacy. And the effects? Well, you can guess. Addiction, hallucinations, dependency. The lines between dreams and waking life began to blur. Some people woke up confused, others didn't wake at all. There's a chilling entry in a London coroner's record from 1885. A woman, 42, found peacefully in bed, her hands crossed, a bottle of soothing cordial, still warm. It was ruled a domestic mischief. No trial, no scandal. Just another whisper lost to the mattress. But it wasn't always sinister. Sometimes, the danger wore the face of sweetness. Godfrey's cordial, a mixture of opium and trichina, was marketed for infants. Infants given by parents who just wanted their baby to sleep through the night. You picture a young mother, exhausted, eyes rimmed red, pouring just one spoonful into a tin cup. She doesn't know. She just wants quiet. And then, of course, there were those who did know, but didn't care. For them, sleep wasn't the goal, it was the side effect. What they really wanted was escape. Not everyone could afford leisure, or travel, or therapy. But laudanum, that could buy you a few hours without sorrow. A holiday from grief, wrapped in velvet darkness, and in a time when mental health wasn't even a phrase yet. That was a kind of mercy. Artists, poets, and writers were particularly susceptible. Coleridge de Quincey, Rossetti dabbled in dream-making powders. Some called it creative fuel. Others called it soul theft. But none of them slept peacefully for long. One letter from a minor poet reads, "I take the drops at 10, and hope for dreams that do not wake me weeping. Most nights, they are kind. On others, I see too much." You closed the letter slowly. Even among ordinary people, the desire for deeper sleep could lead them into deeper waters. A mother might take a spoonful just for calm. A clerk might sip from a flask under his pillow. A widow might weep over her tincture bottle and call it prayer. And no one spoke of it loudly. He didn't boast about using opium to sleep. He didn't tell the neighbors. You just labeled the bottle soothing syrup and hoped no one asked. Still, whispers collected like dust. Some historians debate just how widespread the use really was. We lack proper records, they argue. Too much shame, too many euphemisms. But the patterns are there. In the recipes, in the journals, in the gaps between sentences. Because sometimes, silence is the clearest evidence. You sit with that silence now. A kind of grief hums underneath. It's an ache for all those people who only wanted rest, who boiled lettuce, stirred milk, counted prayers, and still woke up afraid. So they turned to bottles, and powders, and drafts that promised to hold them fast. And sometimes, they did dot the house around you shifts slightly, as if remembering too. But the shame, it doesn't live here anymore. Just understanding, gentle recognition, that humans have always tried to ease themselves into sleep. With leaves, with songs, with chemistry, with hope. You don't have to approve of it, but you can witness it. You can see the softness in the choices, even the desperate ones. And you can be grateful for quieter tools, for safer cups, for the fact that tonight, all you need is a voice, and a dim room, and maybe a fan, humming low in the corner like a lullaby. The fan clicks softly now once, then twice as if nodding along. You lean back, breathing slower, deeper, lulled by the strange companionship of past and present. And tonight, we visit a quieter corner of Victorian life, the bedtime snack, as a form of grief management, because sometimes, the cup wasn't for sleep. It was for sadness. For all the things that couldn't be said at the dinner table. For the letters that came too late. For the beds that stayed half-full. Do you find a recipe tucked inside a weathered hymnal, scribbled in pencil on the back of a dried flower pressing? The writing is faded but careful. To soothe a heart worn thin. Warm milk, clove, a shaving of lemon peel, and just enough brandy to remember the sound of his laugh. It's not labeled. No title. Just ingredients and intention. A private ritual, unspoken, unsaked. Our Victorian society didn't leave much space for emotional transparency. Grief was codified, pressed into stages of mourning, fabric types, and how many buttons you were allowed to fasten. But in the quiet of night, After the curtains were drawn and the crepe hung on the door, the rules softened. That's where the secret snacks came in. Widows were often encouraged to drink beef tea, not for nutrition, but to fortify the spirit. It was a thin, savory broth, simmered for hours, strained until clear, then served warm, never hot. Something about the gentle saltiness made it easier to swallow tears. Children who lost siblings were given comfort biscuits. Dry, sweetened crackers flavored with anise or caraway and told to eat them slowly, as a way of pacing the sorrow. One boy's diary notes, "The biscuit was hard, but helped. I chewed until my head was quiet." It sounds like something a child shouldn't have to write. There were rules about mourning, even in food. Some believed that too much flavor invited forgetting, that spice was disrespectful, that if your food brought you joy, you hadn't suffered enough. So grief snacks were often soft, pale, and deliberately dull, not because they had to be, but because they fit the feeling. You turn the page and find a preserved funeral menu, not for the funeral itself, but the evening meal after. Stewed apples, weak tea, water crackers, bread pudding with no raisins. You stare at the last line. No raisins. Someone had made that decision on purpose. As if even a dried grape might seem too cheerful. But food, even quiet food, became a kind of companion. For the grieving, it was something to do. Stir the milk, toast the bread, peel the apple. Action softened the ache. Preparation filled the silence. You weren't just cooking, you were coping. And bedtime was the most fragile hour. That's when the visitors were gone. The plates washed. The performance of strength, suspended, just you. And whatever you hadn't said out loud. One woman wrote in her journal, dated 1866, "I take my custard in the parlor now. I do not eat it because I am hungry. I eat it because I must do something soft. Something soft." That phrase stays with you, because even now, we look for it. After hard days, after breakups, after funerals, you find yourself reaching for soup, toast, a mug of coconut, because they solve anything, but because they hold you while the pain breathes. The Victorians understood this, even if they never said it plainly. Their sleep foods weren't just medicine for the body. They were a language, a way of saying, "I'm still here. I'm still trying. I haven't let the darkness swallow me entirely." Some baked grief cakes that weren't meant to be shared, just one small pan, eaten piece by piece, over several nights. Others steeped tea with dried violets, claiming it made the dreams less sharp. One particularly odd remedy involved rubbing lavender oil on the soles of the feet and sleeping with a biscuit under the pillow. You're not sure what the biscuit was for. Backup snack, emotional anchor, ghost bait. Still, every strange ritual said the same thing. You are allowed to feel this, even if you have to hide it in a cup. So tonight, if your chest feels tight, or your mind won't quiet, or something old is knocking at your memory's door, pour yourself something small, something warm. Doesn't have to be milk, doesn't have to be anything from 1866. But let it be gentle, let it be yours, let it say something soft. Just for me, and if you cry into your mug, well, so did they. By now, the walls feel closer, but not in a frightening way. More like an embrace. You're deep inside the night now, and it's time to talk about something playful. Something the Victorians never admitted was playful. Dream engineering. That's right. In between the rules and restrictions and bowls of flavorless mush, there was a secret art, half science, half whimsy, of eating in such a way that it might shape your dreams. Because sure, the Victorians feared nightmares, but they also longed for visions, messages, prophecies, love stories, dignified nonsense. And if the right food could cause that, why not play sorcerer with your supper? Enter the dream menus. You flip open a slim, cloth-bound volume titled Gentle Influences Upon the Subconscious Mind through the Evening Table. Inside, written with extreme sincerity, is a list of recipes and their supposed effects on one's dreams. Some examples. Cold apple with cinnamon brings visions of travel in fields. Warm barley with cloves summons glimpses of deceased relatives, most often benign. Milk with rosewater encourages dreams of romantic innocence. Boiled leeks, not advised, has been linked to dreams involving bureaucratic entrapment. That last one sounds personal. These dream menus weren't mainstream. You wouldn't find them in the kitchen of a strict moralist or at your local apothecary. They were whispered, scribbled, passed between spiritualists, amateur mesmerists, and bored ants with too much fennel. Some people went further, using food in tandem with ritual. One woman wrote of placing an orange peel beneath her pillow to dream of the man she would marry. Others swore by sleeping with a spoonful of honey on the tongue. One entry recommends eating violet sugar while looking into a mirror, lit only by moonlight, reflected in water. That's not a bedtime snack. That's a seance, but behind the theatrics was something tender. Hope. The same hope that fuels horoscopes and lucky socks. The belief that maybe, just maybe, you could steer the wild river of sleep with a teacup and a biscuit. You lean into the idea. What would your dream menu be tonight? A slice of warm toast to feel steady. A sprinkle of nutmeg for quiet memory. A sliver of pear because sometimes sweetness needs to sneak in sideways. Victorians also loved dream diaries. Many kept them by the bed, tucked in nightstands or beneath doilies. Some were scientific, logging food and dream content with eerie precision. Others were poetic, full of sketches, pressed petals, and dream fragments, scrawled like spells. A pale garden, 3 bells. I was flying but worried about my shoes. Father as a moth. I fed him cake. Something chased me, but it smelled like strawberries. Sometimes, entire weeks were structured around dream goals. A woman might eat light meals and practice thought purification to summon a vision of her late sister. A man might cut out cheese for fear it would warp his dreams of angelic guidance. Some spiritualists believed that food could open portals. Others just hoped for a decent nap and maybe a cameo from Queen Victoria in their subconscious opera. Of course, not everyone took it seriously. Newspapers poked fun. Scientists scoffed. One letter to the Times reads, "Last night, I followed your pea pudding protocol and dreamt only of falling down a very slow staircase. Please advise." Still, the fascination endured. Because no matter how absurd it seemed, the idea of curating your inner theater was too tempting to let go. And maybe it wasn't about accuracy at all. Maybe it was just about intention. About slowing down enough to prepare your body and imagination at the same time. About honoring the strangeness of sleep with a little flair. A little theater. You reach for your imaginary notebook. What dreams would you ask for tonight, if food could deliver them? A quiet train ride through snow. The sound of pages turning without hands. A long-lost friend smiling from a windowsill. No leaks. The dream menus may have vanished from modern kitchens, but the longing remains. We still search for meaning in what we eat. Still make weird choices at 11 p.m. Still fall asleep with a spoon on the nightstand, or toast crumbs on the sheets. And sometimes, those dreams do show up. Not because of what we ate, but because of what we were willing to hope for. And that, really, is the most Victorian thing of all. There's a faint rustle now, maybe from the curtains, maybe from your thoughts. You've settled into the rhythm, the lull, the layered history of all those odd little rituals. But here's something you might not expect. Not all Victorian bedtime foods were soft, warm, or poetic. Some were downright stubborn, crunchy, pungent, even pickled. Welcome to the world of sleepers' fare in the working class, the unromantic, unscented, and utterly practical side of Victorian night snacking. You start in a tenement kitchen, where the fire is down to coals and a mother is scraping something off a tin plate. There's no milk here, no lace napkins or silver spoons. Just a loaf end, a bit of onion, maybe a scrap of cheese if the week's been kind. This was the reality for millions. Food not for dreams, but for fending off hunger long enough to get a few hours of rest before dawn. One of the most common nighttime snacks. Dripping toast. A slice of stale bread, fried in leftover animal fats, beef, sometimes pork, occasionally a mystery then sprinkled with salt. Crunchy, greasy, and stubbornly satisfying. Think of it as the Victorian version of gas station nachos. It was filling, it was cheap, and it was controversial. Health pamphlets warned against its oily temperament. One public health reformer called it a greasy rebellion against moral digestion, which is probably the most British insult ever hurled at a snack. But for many, it was survival. Factory workers, coal haulers, domestic maids, they didn't have time for broths or barley lullabies. They needed something that stuck. Something that said, "I know you're getting up again in 4 hours. Here's a layer of fat to hold you together." And then there were the pickled things. Late at night, if you could afford it, you might sneak a slice of pickled beetroot or cabbage. Something sharp to wake the mouth before sleep. Sounds counterintuitive, right? But many working-class homes believed that a little acidity cleared the head. It wasn't about sedation. It was about balance. Even Ada, cold, mashed potatoes pressed into patties and eaten by hand. No fork. Add vinegar if you're fancy. Add mustard if you're daring. Add nothing if you're broke. You begin to see the contrast. The rich had their custards and rose milk. The poor had boiled turnips and hard toast. And yet both called it bedtime. Food, both saw it as a necessary pause between labor and rest, between daylight and dream. And the stories behind these foods are just as human. One elderly lamplighter wrote, "I take my bread with fat before bed, so the morning doesn't start. As cruel, it's not pleasant, but it works." A maid from Sheffield confessed in a letter, "Sometimes I chew onion before bed, to remind me I am still real. I cannot say why this helps." And my favorite, a chimney sweep, age 12, said simply, "It tastes bad, but I know I'll sleep. It's like eating armor." That line sticks with you. Eating armor, because not all rituals are soft. Some are built from stubbornness and leftover potatoes. Some come without silverware, without comfort, without even warmth. But they still matter. Even the bedtime drink had a harder edge in these households. Forget lavender syrup, it was beer. Small beer, if you're lucky. Weak and sour, and barely alcoholic, but it calmed the stomach and dulled the aches. Not enough to make you sing, just enough to sleep without feeling the floor too much. Sometimes, families shared one cup. A ritual of closeness, born not from affection, but necessity. Sip and pass, one woman wrote. So we don't argue, and no one drinks too fast. You might call it grim. But there's also something tender there. Not sentimental, but real. A kind of solidarity in toast crusts and pickled cabbage. In knowing you can't afford softness, but you can still chew, still lie down, still dream, even if only briefly. And those dreams, they were often about food. A full roast, a steaming pie, a slice of cake that didn't end. In many oral histories, people mention dreaming of butter, just butter, spread thick, golden, endless dot. It's funny how your brain knows what you're missing tonight. We remember them too. The sleepers with sore backs and burnt fingers. The ones who ate their armor and slipped into slumber hoping tomorrow would taste better. Maybe you've been that person before. Maybe you are tonight. And if you are, know this, there is dignity in surviving. In eating what's there. In folding your exhaustion into a crust and calling it good enough. You rest your head now. Not with pity, but with recognition. The kind that says, you ate the toast. You earned your sleep. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then silence again. The kind of silence that feels older than the room. And as you curl further into the blankets, let's enter the most overlooked part of Victorian nighttime life. The midnight kitchen. Because not all sleep happened before food. Some came after it. In secret. In slippers. In rebellion. You see, Victorians didn't love to admit it, but they got up in the middle of the night, just like we do. Not for Instagram scrolling, but for snacking. Quiet, forbidden, midnight snacking. It wasn't called that, of course. They would have referred to it more delicately. Nocturnal nourishment, perhaps, or unofficial repast, but the spirit was the same. That deeply human urge to wander the darkened house in search of something small, warm, and slightly salty. It happened after long balls, after funeral wakes, after bad dreams, even after marital spats, when one party pretended to be asleep and the other padded silently to the pantry. And what did they eat? Cold pudding, usually stiff with thyme and vaguely citrusy. Or heel slices of bread with marmalade so bitter it could double as punishment. One lady's journal described creeping into the scullery at 2 a.m. to eat exactly 3 spoonfuls of leftover rice, custard by moonlight. She did this every Thursday. She never told her husband. Some wrote of slipping a bit of cake from under a napkin. Others nibbled salted nuts they kept hidden in dresser drawers. One enthusiastic clergyman documented his midnight potato habit in obsessive detail, describing a single, cooled potato, peeled and eaten with dignity, beside a candle stub. Dignity, that's the key word. Always dignity. Even in the act of eating cold starch alone, in your NIGHTGOWN. But the midnight kitchen was more than hunger. It was privacy, intimacy, a return to the self after the long performance of the day, especially for women, whose evenings were often still filled with social duties, moral expectations, and relentless corset or why. In those brief, creaking hours, the kitchen changed shape. It stopped being a place of labor and became something else, a confessional, a sanctuary, a slightly dusty chapel where a person could stand barefoot, eat jam with a spoon, and feel completely unjudged. Some kept candles ready for the occasion. Others learned to navigate by instinct alone. 4 steps past the kettle, Reach left, second shelf. A well-trained hand could slice cheese in the dark with surgical precision. And yes, fingers were occasionally lost to pickled onion jars. One woman even installed a midnight tray in her room. Not a luxury, but a practicality. One biscuit, a thimble of sherry, and a tiny dish of stewed prunes in case of restlessness. The line between indulgence and digestion was very, very thin. These snacks weren't announced, they weren't acknowledged. In fact, many journals referred to them only in euphemism. I took a small pause at the pantry. I stepped down. For a reconsideration of bread, the pie and I exchanged glances. Some historians argue this nocturnal grazing represented quiet rebellion. In a society built on order and hierarchy, the act of eating unsupervised was subversive. No one was watching, no one could correct you. That was a freedom so rare, it had to be savored bite by bite. Still, others saw it as vulnerability. A moment when people let down their guards, when the tight waistbands and tighter expectations came off, and they were just human again, hungry, lonely, curious. And there's something wonderfully tender about that image, isn't there? A tired father, warming a spoonful of peas at the hearth. A widowed seamstress sipping tepid tea from a chipped mug. A child sneaking shook bread under her blanket, hoping no one hears the crunch. These weren't feasts. They were fragments. And yet they stitched people back together, in ways more formal meals never could. You glanced toward your own kitchen, now hidden in shadows. How many midnight rituals live in your cupboards? The secret crackers, the late spoons of peanut butter, the lonely, joyful cereal. Maybe you, too, have wandered half asleep, looking for something that wasn't food exactly, but helped anyway. The Victorians would understand, even if they'd call it something unnecessarily dramatic, like culinary twilight yearning. So if you wake later, tonight's open, mouth dry, heart stirred by some invisible act, know that you are not alone. Somewhere in the annals of history, someone else was also standing in a cold kitchen, buttering a scone by moonlight, and no one judged them for it. The night feels softer now, like it's exhaling with you. You've wandered through milk and lettuce, grief and rebellion, dreams and desperation. But now it's time to peel back a different curtain. The role of children in the bedtime food theater. Because while grown-ups stirred their teas and whispered their woes, children had their own sleep snacks. And surprised they were often stranger. You might imagine something simple. Warm milk, a biscuit, maybe a story and a kiss. But Victorian bedtime for children was often a curious blend of discipline, folk medicine, and weirdly specific porridges. Let's start with the rules. Children were expected to eat lightly before bed, meaning soft, white foods with little seasoning. This wasn't just for digestion. It was believed that too much flavor could excite the humors and lead to nightmares, bedwetting, or worse, a flair for dramatics. You laugh softly. Imagine telling a child today, no garlic, dear. It'll make your dreams theatrical. Popular pre-bed items included milk toast bread, soaked in warm milk, until floppy arrowroot biscuits, custard with no spice. Only moral purity. Gruel. Just gruel. And yes, it was as joyless as it sounds. One popular children's manual advised parents to ensure the child eats the same bedtime dish nightly, to cultivate a nature free of novelty and unrest. In other words, eat the same sad bowl forever, or your imagination might become inconvenient. But kids are kids. They found ways to make things weird. One recorded game involved shaping spoonfuls of porridge into ghost faces before swallowing them whole. Another diary entry, written in messy pencil by a boy named Edmund, reads, "I told my sister the toast had dreams in it. She cried, but then she asked for more toast." There were folk remedies too, especially among working-class families, and, in the countryside, onion syrup for bad dreams, licorice root boiled in milk for restless limbs, a smear of mustard on the soles of the feet to ward off nocturnal vapors. You are not making this up, neither were they. Some children were given a cup of chamomile tea, not because they liked it, but because it made them quiet. That was the goal. Always. A child who lay still, didn't speak, and drifted off like a doll in a drawer. But the children, being deeply human and slightly feral, had secret rebellions. One little girl, in a letter to her cousin, admitted to hiding raisins in her nightgown so she could chew them in bed. Another swapped spoonfuls of gruel with bits of chalk to avoid eating it at all. "They both taste of sadness," she wrote, "but chalk doesn't slither." Then there were the bedroom snacks, smuggled in by older siblings or indulgent nannies. Contraband, sugar lumps, bits of jam wrapped in paper, One notorious governess was dismissed for slipping slices of plum tart to her charges after prayers. It was called behavior unfit for Christian digestion. And yet, you sensed that these moments, the hidden bites, the whispered crumbs were more comforting than any official supper. Not just because of the sugar, but because of the secrecy, the ritual, the choice dot in wealthier homes. Some children had nursery suppers, a proper meal served in their upstairs rooms, away from the dining room drama. Stewed fruit, creamed rice, soft egg in a silver spoon. But even here, the emphasis was on predictability, comfort not just in taste, but in repetition. You knew what to expect. You weren't surprised by the night. Still, dreams snuck in. One young girl wrote of eating vanilla pudding and dreaming that her spoon turned into a swan. Another, after an especially bland potato dish, dreamed of flying through a garden of peppercorns and yelling, "Season me, you cowards." That entry is now framed in a museum, and rightly so. You smile, imagining all these children sleepy, hungry for more than their spoonfuls. Not unruly, just ... alive. And you wonder, what were your childhood sleep foods? The thing you begged for, or snuck, or ate too fast, hoping no one would notice the crumbs. Maybe it wasn't elegant. Maybe it wasn't milk toast in a porcelain bowl. Maybe it was dry cereal with your fingers, or cold rice from the fridge. But it soothed you, held you, said, "Here, take this. It's not much, but it's yours." And in that moment, the night wasn't so scary. You weren't so small. You were a creature with rituals, with needs, with sugar on your chin. Just like them. We're deep in the belly of the night now. The kind of hour where time feels syrupy, where thoughts melt at the edges. This is when the past stops being history and starts feeling like a house you used to live in. One where someone, maybe you, maybe not, keeps a pot of lettuce broth simmering on the stove. Yes, let's return to it. The humble, ridiculous, quietly persistent star of our story. Victorian lettuce broth. It's easy to laugh at it. A hot drink made from boiled lettuce. It sounds like a dare, or a punishment invented by someone who'd never tasted butter. But there it was, passed down in cookbooks, whispered between neighbors, and faithfully poured into mugs, night after night. Why? The prevailing belief was that lettuce, particularly romaine or cosad, a naturally soporific effect, not because of magic, because of something called lacticarium, milky sap that collects in the stalks when the plant is damaged. The Victorians believed this sap cooled the blood, calmed the mind, and lulled the body into a gentle, obedient sleep. Think of it as a leafy predecessor to melatonin, or the original sleepy time tea, minus the charming bear on the box. The typical recipe: a handful of fresh lettuce leaves, preferably untouched by wrath or blemish, boiled in water for 15 to 20 minutes. Strained, served warm, occasionally with a spoon of honey for moral encouragement. One 1870s pamphlet advises drinking it in silence, while seated upright, facing east. You're not sure why. East, maybe the sun had something to do with it. Or maybe it just sounded poetic in the brochure. Now here's the odd part. It worked, at least, sometimes. Maybe it wasn't chemical. Maybe it was the ritual, the heat, the quiet, the act of choosing sleep over stimulation. Choosing slowness in a world that was rapidly filling with railways, factories, telegrams, and gas lamps buzzing all night. And unlike opium tinctures or chloral hydrates, lettuce broth was safe, gentle, unthreatening. You couldn't overdose on it. You couldn't get hooked. You couldn't wake up 3 days later in someone else's bonnet. You just ... slept. Or didn't. But either way, you tried softly, and that softness mattered. Some people drank it every night. Others only on Sundays. One man insisted on reading his favorite sermon while sipping, claiming the combination of warm lettuce and moral rhetoric guaranteed a dreamless repose, unmarred by vanity. That's one way to describe it. There's something beautiful about the absurdity of it, about trying so hard to sleep you'll boil a salad and hope for peace. And yet, don't we still do it? We blend kale into smoothies. We buy oat milk with magnesium. We eat overpriced crackers branded with moons and wellness promises. Our rituals have new names: adaptogens, circadian resets, sleep hygiene, but the goal is the same: to feel like the night won't betray us. You can almost hear them now, those sleepy Victorians, drowsy, hopeful, sipping their broth by candlelight. Some of them genuinely believed in the science. Others just wanted something to hold, a reason to sit still, a reason to breathe slower. And for the record, lettuce broth doesn't taste bad. It tastes like grass that's been forgiven, like the memory of soup, like nothing, in the most comforting way. One child called it the tea that doesn't try too hard. Maybe that's why it's lasted. Because it's unassuming. Because it asks nothing of you, except to believe that you deserve rest. So tonight, as you lie there, blanket around your shoulders, breath slowing, thoughts softening, imagine that cup in your hands. Warm, steady, faintly green. You don't have to sip it, just know it's there. And that you, like every drowsy soul before you, are allowed to sleep without apology. The end of the night is not a door that shuts, it's a soft slope. A kind of descent. And you're on it now, coasting gently towards sleep. Your mind cushioned by all the odd and tender rituals we've uncovered. This is the final stop. The afterglow of the Victorian bedtime table. What happened not before sleep, not during it, but just after. That first flicker of waking, that murky moment between dream and day, when the room is still dim and the world hasn't asked anything of you yet. The Victorians had a word for this. Mournful. A poetic term, now forgotten, to describe the fragile, flickering sensations of early waking, especially after a particularly vivid night. Mournful wasn't about getting up. It was about lying there, interpreting the residue of dreams, listening to the fire pop, counting the cracks in the ceiling, trying to remember if the pudding you dreamed about had raisins or was disappointing. Historically accurate. And many people planned for this moment. They left things at their bedside. A biscuit, a sip of milk, a note to themselves. Some even kept a little square of chocolate wrapped in muslin to greet the tongue with sweetness. Before speech, you can't help but love that. A piece of chocolate, not for energy, but for emotional buffering. Others prepared what was called a wake warm. It could be a small pot of barley tea, or a heated stone under the mattress, or simply a woolen sock, pre-warmed by the fire. Something gentle to bridge the cold gap between sleeping and rising. One woman described her morning routine as, "I drink warm milk from a cup with a chip, because it makes me feel like I've survived something." That line echoes, because that's really what all this has been, hasn't it? A quiet record of survival, not of battles or revolutions, but of people making it through the night with whatever comforts they had. Lettuce, toast, broth, brandy, a biscuit on the floor. We tend to think of history as loud, but it isn't always. Sometimes, it's a whisper at the foot of the bed, a teacup cooling beside a candle, a listless spoon in a bowl of something barely flavored but full of hope. Even now, the traces are with us. Every time you double-check the lock, every time you light a candle for ambience, every time you make that weird little snack you'd never admit to anyone else just because it makes you feel safe. That's your own private lineage, your own bedtime legacy. And if you ever feel strange for needing a ritual, or a food, or a softness to sleep, remember the Victorian man who swore his dreams were more vivid if he wore blue socks and ate plum preserves on even-numbered days. You're in excellent company. There is no wrong way to prepare for sleep. Not then, not now. Whether you boil lettuce, butter dry toast, whisper a wish into your mug, or simply lie very still and imagine your spine sinking through the mattress, it all counts. So here we are. The journey's end. The broth has cooled. The crumbs have settled. The dream menus are folded away. And you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The fan hums. The night holds you. The walls are kind. And somewhere far behind your eyes, a vision waits. Of fields, of candlelight, of something soft being handed to you with both hands. Take it. You don't have to understand it. Just rest. Let the past dim. Let the present dissolve. Let your breath fall like snow. Let your muscles go quiet. Let the day leave you gently, like a polite guest who knows when it's time to go, because you've made it. You've walked through strange kitchens, stirred old pots, read forgotten diaries. You've sat with the sorrow, the salt, the sweetness, and now you get to sleep. You're safe, you're still, you're here. End of script. Sweet dreams. Hi ChatGPT.